I was standing 10 feet away when my son's father-in-law raised his glass and told a room full of people that men like me should be grateful just to be invited to the table. A few people laughed, not loudly, not enough to make it look cruel, just that soft, uncomfortable laughter people use when a rich man says something ugly and everyone is too afraid to challenge him. Richard Bennett smiled as if he had made a harmless joke. "Michael's a good man," he continued, placing one hand on my shoulder. "A hard worker. But there's a difference between building things with your hands and understanding how real business works." More laughter. I looked across the ballroom at my son. Ethan was standing beside his wife, Claire, holding a glass of champagne. For 1 second, our eyes met. I waited. I waited for him to say something. Anything. "Dad, that's enough." "Richard, don't speak to my father that way. Even a simple, that's not true." But Ethan lowered his eyes. And in that moment, I understood something that hurt far more than Richard Bennett's words ever could. My son wasn't embarrassed by what Richard had said. He was embarrassed by me. I could feel the heat rising in my face. Around us stood investors, attorneys, executives, and people whose names appeared on buildings and hospital wings. Men in tailored suits. Women wearing jewelry worth more than the first house I ever bought. And there I was, Michael Harper, 58 years old, son of a mechanic, former construction worker, a man who had spent most of his life waking up before sunrise. Richard gave my shoulder one final pat. "Don't take it personally, Mike." "Mike." He knew I hated being called Mike. "Some people build a table," he said. "Other people make the decisions at it." That time, Claire laughed. My daughter-in-law looked directly at me and laughed. I said nothing, not because I was afraid of Richard Bennett, and not because I didn't have an answer. I said nothing because 3 days earlier, I had found a document inside my company's private server. A document with my name on it. A document I had never signed. According to that document, within 30 days, I would no longer control the company I had spent 32 years building. My son would. And, standing in that ballroom, watching Ethan refuse to defend me, I finally began to understand why. My name is Michael Harper, and 32 years before that night, Harper Construction consisted of one used pickup truck, a toolbox, and $480 in my checking account. I was 26 years old. My wife, Sarah, was pregnant with Ethan. We lived in a small rented house outside Fort Worth, Texas, where the air conditioner broke every summer and the kitchen ceiling leaked whenever the rain came from the west. I didn't have investors. I didn't have a business degree. I didn't even have an office. What I had was a truck that started most mornings, 2 strong hands, and a wife who believed in me before there was anything worth believing in. Sarah used to sit at our kitchen table with a calculator and a yellow notebook, keeping track of every dollar that came in. I repaired fences, poured concrete, replaced roofs, fixed whatever people were willing to pay me to fix. For the first 3 years, I worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7. When Ethan was born, I missed his first steps because I was 40 miles away repairing storm damage to a warehouse roof. I carried that guilt for years. Sarah never used it against me. "You're building something for him," she told me. And I believed her. By the time Ethan was 10, I had 12 employees. By the time he graduated high school, I had 63. By the time he finished college, Harper Construction was handling commercial projects across North Texas. I was proud of the company, but I was prouder of my son. Ethan was everything I had never been at his age. Educated, confident, comfortable in rooms that had once made me nervous. When he joined the company at 27, I gave him opportunities nobody had ever given me. I wanted him to have a better life. Maybe that was my first mistake. Or maybe my mistake was believing that gratitude naturally follows sacrifice. Sarah died 6 years before that night in the ballroom. Cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to funeral. There are losses that hurt, and then there are losses that divide your life into a before and an after. Sarah was my dividing line. After she was gone, the house became too quiet. I stayed at the office later. Ethan started visiting more often. We had dinner every Sunday. For a while, I thought losing Sarah had brought my son and me closer. Then he met Claire Bennett. The first time Ethan brought her my house, she was charming. That's the word I would have used then. Charming. She complimented the house, asked about Sarah, listen while I told stories about the early years of the company. But I noticed something. Every time I spoke about the business, Claire asked about ownership. Not the work, not the employees. Ownership. How much of the company did I still control? Did Ethan have shares? Did we own the land under our main equipment yard? I thought she was simply interested in Ethan's future. Then I met her father. Richard Bennett had made his money in private equity and commercial development. He had the kind of confidence that comes from spending 30 years in rooms where nobody tells you no. The first time we shook hands, he looked at the calluses on my fingers. "Still working in the field?" he asked. "Sometimes." He smiled. "Hard habit to break, I suppose." I knew what he meant. To Richard, work was something other people did. At first, I ignored him. Ethan loved Claire. That was enough for me. They married 18 months later in a ceremony that cost more than my first 10 years of mortgage payments combined. I stood beside my son. I smiled for the photographs. And when Sarah's absence became too heavy, Ethan put his arm around me and whispered, "She'd be proud of us, Dad." I believed him. I believed almost everything Ethan told me back then. Over the next 2 years, things began to change. Slowly, Ethan wanted more responsibility in the company. I gave it to him. Then he wanted authority over major contracts. I gave him that too. Then he asked for access to corporate property records. That was the first request that felt strange. "What do you need those for?" I asked. He shrugged. "Long-term planning." I remember smiling. "Planning to bury me already?" He laughed. "Come on, Dad. You know what I mean." I gave him access. 3 months later, Richard Bennett invited me to lunch. He spent most of that lunch talking about my company's main property, 27 acres on the edge of a growing development corridor. My equipment yard sat there. So did our offices, storage buildings, and maintenance facility. I had bought the land 21 years earlier when nobody wanted it. Richard wanted to know if I had ever considered selling. "No, everything has a price." "Not everything." He smiled at me across the table. "That's something people say before they hear the right number." I told him the land wasn't for sale. After that, Ethan started asking questions too. Not directly. That would have been easier to notice. Instead, he asked whether I planned to retire, whether I had updated my will, whether the company would be easier to manage if ownership were consolidated. Each question made sense by itself. Together, they started to feel like footsteps behind me in a dark hallway. Still, I trusted him. He was my son. Then came the charity dinner. The night Richard humiliated me in front of everyone. The night Ethan said nothing. I left the ballroom shortly after 11. I didn't say goodbye. I was halfway down the hotel corridor when I realized I had left my phone at the table. When I returned, most of the guests had moved toward the bar. My phone was still beside my chair. I picked it up. That was when I heard Claire's voice from the other side of a decorative wall near the private lounge. "You pushed too hard tonight." Richard answered. "He needs to understand his position. What if he gets suspicious?" A pause. Then Claire laughed softly. "Ethan says he won't." I stopped moving. Richard lowered his voice, but I could still hear him. "And the signature?" "Soon." "How soon?" "Give it a few weeks. Ethan's handling him." My hand tightened around my phone. Then Claire said the words I still remember exactly. "Once Ethan gets the signature, the old man won't be able to change anything." I stood there in silence. For 32 years, I had walked onto construction sites believing the most dangerous things were the ones you could see. A weak beam, a damaged cable, a crack in concrete. I was wrong. The most dangerous thing I had ever built was trust. Because while I had been watching Richard Bennett, I had never thought to watch my own son. I didn't confront them. That surprised even me. The younger version of myself would have stepped around that wall and demanded answers. But at 58, I had learned something construction teaches you quickly. When you find a crack, you don't start swinging a hammer. First, you find out how deep it goes. The next morning, I drove to the office before sunrise and opened the document I had found 3 days earlier. It transferred broad control of Harper Construction to Ethan. My supposed signature looked almost perfect. Almost. I printed everything and called Daniel Cole, my attorney and one of my oldest friends. 2 hours later, we were sitting in his office. "I didn't sign this," I told him. Daniel studied the pages. "Then someone wants people to believe you did." He began checking company records while I reviewed Ethan's recent activity. What we found made my stomach turn. For months, documents had been prepared to restructure the company. Ethan would gain control of major assets, including the 27-acre property Richard had tried to buy. Then Daniel discovered why that land mattered so much. A major transportation and commercial development project was being planned near our property. The announcement was not public yet, but once approved, the land could be worth several times its current value. Richard Bennett had connections in commercial development. Suddenly, every question made sense. Claire asking about ownership, Richard offering to buy, Ethan asking about my retirement. Still, I wanted to believe my son was being manipulated, so I gave him one chance. That Sunday, Ethan came to my house for dinner. We sat on the back porch where he used to do his homework as a boy. Everything all right at the company? I asked. Of course. No unusual paperwork. He looked at me for half a second too long. No. What? I watched his face. If someone wanted something from this family, Ethan, I'd hope you would tell me. He smiled. Dad, you worry too much. Then he looked me directly in the eyes. You can trust me. That was the moment something inside me changed. Not because I knew everything, because I knew he was lying. 2 days later, Daniel called. Michael, you need to come here. When I arrived, he closed the office door and placed a small recorder on the desk. One of our security systems automatically stored audio from certain executive conference rooms. Daniel had found a recording attached to an archived meeting file. He pressed play. Richard's voice came first. Once control transfers, your father can't interfere. Then Claire. And the land. A pause. Then I heard my son. The land comes with the company. My hands went cold. Richard asked, You're sure Michael will sign? Ethan laughed. My father trusts me. He always has. I stared at the recorder. Then Ethan said the words that ended whatever doubt I still had. After the transfer, Dad won't be making decisions anymore. I've waited long enough to run the company my way. Daniel stopped the recording. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I had spent days telling myself that Richard was using my son, that Claire was manipulating him, that Ethan was trapped. But he wasn't trapped. He was part of it. My own son had opened the door and invited them inside. Daniel finally asked, What do you want to do? I looked through the office window at the city below. 32 years earlier, I had built Harper Construction for my family. Now my family was trying to take it from me. I want them to think I know nothing, I said. Daniel stared at me. For how long? I picked up the forged document. Until they're absolutely certain they've won. For the next 3 weeks, I became exactly the man they wanted me to be. Tired, trusting, ready to step aside. I started leaving the office earlier. I asked Ethan to handle meetings I normally attended. When he suggested that I should finally enjoy retirement, I didn't argue. Maybe you're right, I told him. The change was immediate. Claire began calling me more often. Richard suddenly treated me like family. At dinner one evening, he raised his glass. To Michael, a man smart enough to know when it's time for the next generation to lead. I smiled. Ethan smiled too. None of them knew Daniel and I were working every night to protect everything they were trying to take. The 27 acres were legally separated from the company's operating assets. Control of the property was moved into a structure Ethan could not touch. Then Daniel found something even worse. Richard had already been negotiating with a development group. He had promised them access to my land. There were draft agreements, projected profits, and documents carrying what appeared to be my signature. They weren't planning to steal the company someday. They were already selling pieces of it. Daniel wanted to contact the authorities immediately. Not yet, I said. Michael, these people forged your name. I know. Then what are you waiting for? I thought about Ethan looking me in the eyes and saying, You can trust me. I want him to have one final chance. A week later, Ethan announced a company event. Investors, senior employees, business partners, and members of the Bennett family would attend. The official purpose was to celebrate Harper Construction's 32nd anniversary. The real purpose was different. I was expected to announce my retirement and transfer control to my son. Ethan came to my house the night before. For a moment, standing in my kitchen, he looked like the boy I remembered. Dad, I know this is difficult. Is it? You built everything, but I'll protect it. I almost asked him to tell me the truth. Almost. Instead, I said, Your mother would have wanted us to stay together. His face changed for just a second. Then he hugged me. I'm doing this for the family. I stood there with my arms at my sides. The next morning, Ethan arrived at my office carrying a leather folder. Just the final paperwork. He placed several pages in front of me. I read them slowly. The documents he expected me to sign would have given him control, but Daniel had prepared replacements. The pages looked similar. The consequences were completely different. I signed. Ethan watched my pen move across the paper. When I finished, he exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for months. Then he smiled. Thank you, Dad. He took the folder and left. I waited until the door closed. Then Daniel stepped out of the conference room next door. He thinks it's done, he said. I looked through the window as my son crossed the parking lot. Yes. That evening, hundreds of people would gather to watch Ethan Harper inherit his father's company. At least, that was what Ethan believed. What he didn't know was that by the time he stepped onto that stage, he would no longer have a position at Harper Construction at all. The ballroom was full by 7. Employees I had known for 20 years stood beside investors, attorneys, and business partners. On the stage behind Ethan was a large screen displaying the Harper Construction logo. Richard Bennett sat in the front row. Claire sat beside him. They both looked very comfortable. Ethan stepped to the microphone. 32 years ago, my father started this company with almost nothing. The audience applauded. Tonight, he begins a new chapter, and I have the honor of continuing what he built. More applause. Then he called my name. I walked onto the stage. Ethan hugged me for the cameras and handed me the microphone. I looked at the crowd. I did start this company with almost nothing, I said. One truck, a toolbox, and a wife who believed in me. The room became quiet. I always planned to leave this company to my son. Ethan smiled, until I discovered that he had decided to take it before I was ready to give it. His smile disappeared. Behind me, the screen changed. The first document appeared. My forged signature was enlarged for everyone to see. A murmur moved through the room. Dad, Ethan said quietly. What are you doing? I ignored him. More documents appeared. Property transfers. Draft agreements. Messages between Richard and potential buyers. Richard stood. This is inappropriate. No, I said. Forging my signature was inappropriate. The room went silent. Claire turned toward her father. Ethan stepped closer to me. You don't understand what you're looking at. I understand perfectly. Then the recording played. Richard's voice filled the ballroom. Once control transfers, your father can't interfere. Then Claire's. And the land? Finally, Ethan's voice. The land comes with the company. People turned toward him. Ethan went pale. Turn that off. The recording continued. My father trusts me. He always has. I watched my son hear his own betrayal in front of hundreds of people. When the recording ended, nobody applauded. Nobody moved. Richard pointed at me. You're destroying your own family. I looked at him. No, I'm stopping you from destroying what's left of it. Then I turned to Ethan. The documents you took from my office this morning did not transfer control of Harper Construction to you. His face changed. What? They removed you from every executive position you held. Claire stood. You can't do that. I already did. I explained that the 27 acres had been legally separated from the company. Richard's promised deal was worthless, and every forged document Daniel had discovered had already been delivered to our attorneys. Richard started toward the stage. This is a misunderstanding. No, I said. It's evidence. Several people near him stepped away. That was when I saw it happen. The confidence disappeared from Richard's face. For the first time since I had met him, he looked afraid. Ethan stared at me. His voice was barely audible. You planned all of this. I gave you a chance to tell me the truth. You chose a company over your own son. That sentence hurt, but not as much as it would have 3 weeks earlier. I looked directly at him. No, Ethan. The entire ballroom was silent. You chose the company over your own father. Then I put the microphone down and walked off the stage. Behind me, the room exploded into voices. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next, because the truth was finally out, and now all of us would have to live with it. The investigation lasted months. Richard Bennett denied everything at first. Then his partners began walking away. The development deal collapsed. Attorneys started asking questions about the forged documents, And people who once returned Richard's calls within minutes suddenly became impossible to reach. Claire blamed her father. Then she blamed Ethan. Their marriage lasted another 4 months. Without the company, the land, or the future they had imagined, there wasn't much left holding them together. I didn't celebrate any of it. People expected me to. They thought revenge should feel like victory. It didn't. I had protected my company, but I had lost my son. 6 months after the night in the ballroom, Ethan came to my house. He looked older. We sat on the same back porch where he had lied to me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Claire's gone." I heard. "Richard used me." "Yes." Ethan looked down. "But I let him." That was the first honest thing he had said to me in a long time. He told me he had spent years feeling like Harper Construction would always be my company, no matter how hard he worked. He wanted to prove he could be more than Michael Harper's son. "So you try to take everything from me?" I asked. His eyes filled with tears. "I thought once I had control, I could fix it later." "You can fix mistakes, Ethan. Betrayal is different." He nodded. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. "Can you forgive me?" I looked at my son. Part of me wanted to say yes. But forgiveness given too quickly is sometimes just another lie. "I don't know," I said. He nodded again. Then he stood and left. A year has passed since that night. Harper Construction is still operating. I'm still the owner, although I've begun giving more responsibility to people who earn my trust. Not because they share my last name, because they earned it. Last month, I visited Sarah's grave. I told her I was sorry. Sorry that I couldn't keep our family the way she remembered it. Then I realized something. Loving someone does not mean allowing them to destroy you. And protecting yourself does not mean you stopped loving them. That evening, I received a message from Ethan. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. It said, "I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I just want to become someone you might be able to call your son again someday." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed 4 words. "Then start with the truth." I don't know how our story ends. Maybe some wounds heal. Maybe some never completely do. But I know this. Trust can take a lifetime to build and only seconds to destroy. And sometimes the hardest person to protect yourself from is the person you never believed you would need protection from. So tell me, if your own child betrayed you for money and power, could you ever truly forgive them? Or are some betrayals too deep to forget?